Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we explore the intersection of game design and storycraft. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today we have the pleasure of delving into the multifaceted world of game design across multiple formats. Joining us is the esteemed Andy Ashcraft. With a remarkable career spanning 3 decades, Andy has left an indelible mark on the gaming industry, from his early days as a designer at Virtus to his current endeavors as the founder of Giants Dance Games. Join us as we unravel the intricacies of storytelling through gameplay mechanics and explore Andy's wealth of experience in crafting immersive, interactive experiences. Andy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's quite an honor to be here.
It's taken us a while to set this up. I've been bugging you for like a year, as you pointed out.
I happened to notice I confused myself a little bit because I saw the April 3rd date, which is when we're recording this, but it was for 2024, and I was very confused.
We've been at it for a while, but I mean, the last 12 months have been a little chaotic, so it's understandable.
Yeah. And but thank you for having me. It's like a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I wanted to talk to you today about that wonderful phrase that we were talking about, ludo-narrative structure, but basically how game and narrative, gameplay design and mechanics interact with narrative and narrative mechanics to create an experience, a player experience across multiple different types of formats and games, because you have such a varied experience. So that's the topic of the day. But before we dig into it, I want your origin story. I want to know, how did you fall in love with gaming and writing? How did you get to where you are today?
In high school, in my freshman year of high school, I wandered into the library and found some guys playing this weird game with dice and paper and pencils, and it turns out it was D&D, and they invited me to join them. And I remember the exact moment that hooked me. They're playing a module, a very sort of famous module, the Tomb of Horrors, and they were early on in it, so nobody had died yet. And we walked in, we got into this little room, and there's a picture in the module that shows a demon sort of chained up to a wall, and there's not much around it, but there's a little urn sitting beside him, just a little decorative thing. And we fought the demon. And then at the end, the GM asked if anybody wanted to do anything else. And they're like, doing their thing. And I said, I want to look in the urn. And the GM was like, what urn? And I said, urn in the picture. And he looked at the picture and went, oh, you find a silver sword in there. And that was the hook, right? That was the sinking of the hook. And I was caught, because I not only realized that he had made that up on the spot for me,
right,
but then that was literally what the game was about. Like these telling stories and just like bouncing ideas off of each other and creating this sort of and it's magical. I still play in D&D. I'm working on my own superhero role-playing game. I love tabletop role-playing games. I always have. But that was the early hook. And then that led to running LARPs for friends of mine through the science fiction club at UCLA called Enigma. And a handful of other game designers have come out of that club because of these LARPs that we ran for each other. We were running a bunch of different LARPs. I learned a lot about how to treat players, and how players kind of what they expect and what they want out of games, and how to sort of manage that expectation. And then that led literally directly. I had a gal in one of my LARPs was working as a temp receptionist at a game company, and they needed a game designer. And she's like, well, give me your resume and I'll take it to them. She was very excited about playing Queen Titania in a Sandman LARP.
Very cool.
And that ended up getting my first professional game design job, and then it sort of one job leads to another once you're in.
Did you do any fiction writing? Was the narrative side of things, was that pretty also?
No and yes. I actually wanted to be a comic book artist. And so I have a degree in design, which was sort of in the art department at UCLA as well. Sort of the art and design are sister programs. But mine was, graphics and product design and that sort of thing. And then I also did some animation. And so I have done some storytelling, like I'm familiar with storytelling, but that wasn't my main thing.
Gotcha.
But certainly creating characters and doing all that stuff is, central to any of that role-playing game stuff.
Very cool. I also went to visual communication school because I wanted to be a comic book artist. I wanted to be the next
Oh, did
Frank
you?
Miller, but I
I
dropped
knew
out.
there was something I liked about you.
Yeah. I ended up dropping out, but then I ended up working at a newspaper and learning how to do design and layout anyways, and I became one anyways. That is part of what was my career for a very long time. So yeah,
That's
crazy.
amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Scott Rogers, who we also were just chatting about, also has a similar degree
Yeah.
from Long Beach.
I did not know that's where I went and got it.
Yeah,
Huh. Designers unite.
exactly.
Okay, well let's dig into the topic of the day, this whole idea around the concept of structures between game design and narrative structures.
Yeah.
To set a big stage to kind of paint the frame around the picture before we dive into the nitty-gritty, how do you picture that concept, that ludo-narrative structure? And that's the last time I'm saying
Sure.
it, I swear. How do you define
That's
it,
fine.
and what role does it play for you in digital tabletop and live action games?
Yeah, it's a good question and a really big question. I also teach game design now at a school called New York Film Academy, and I quite like teaching. And I teach game designers how to design games. But I also teach in the screenwriting department, and I teach screenwriters one class, which is how to write for games. And so for them, these are writers, these are people who understand story and all of that. And for them, it's all about agency. But for the game designers who are usually like have been playing games and making games and doing it, for them, there's a lot of sort of narrative structural stuff that I also need to teach. Um, and so, but the big frame of it, so to answer your question more directly, the big frame of it is that story and game design and all of these things are 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 blocks that you use, bricks that you use when you're building a game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's sort of a tendency to think about gameplay mechanics as on some sort of spectrum, with the other end of it being narrative mechanics. But really, they're all just part of the same thing that you use to build a great game.
Right.
And so you have to start with the question of, well, what kind of experience am I trying to create? How much story does this experience need to have? And story can have a bunch of functions in the game. Like when I talk about story or narrative, I want to separate that from ludo-narrative, of course. And that's the last time I'll probably use that word in this. Story is what we as designers and writers and whatever put into the game. And then the ludo-narrative is what players get out. And so when you say, when you're playing Mario, you never say, oh, finally Mario made that triple jump. Mario didn't do it. You did it.
Right.
Right. That's the ludo-narrative. You made that. The stories you tell about the games that you play afterwards is the ludo-narrative. So there may be narrative in the ludo-narrative. Like, hey, I finally defeated Bowser and rescued Princess Peach. That's where you're telling the story. You're telling a ludo-narrative story about your playthrough.
Right.
But the story of the game is also intruding into that, or layering on top of that, I guess, is a better way of putting that. So there's a bunch of different things that story is really good at doing. Story is really, really good at helping us make sense of things. So story is really good at explaining why things are the way that they are. Story is really good at explaining why you can do some things and can't do another thing. Story is really good for explaining who you are and what you're trying to do. Story is really good at explaining why you should do the things that the game wants you to do. Story is really, really good at making you care about doing the things that the game wants you to do. So, the game wants you to, connect three or more gems in a row. The story can tell you why that's important.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like, why am I doing this? Right. So story can provide stakes, emotional stakes. Story can also provide progress, in the sense that our brains love progress. We love to feel like we're moving forward, that we're getting better, that we're accomplishing things, that we're doing things. And we can feel story moving, as we've all been absorbing stories through television or movies or whatever, comic books and all this stuff. We absorb stories, and so we know what stories feel like. And we know how it feels to move through a story, or have a story move under us, I guess, as a way of thinking about it too. And so when a story moves through a game, we can feel that progress, and progress feels great. Our brains love progress.
Right.
So there's just a lot of really, really good things that story can do to help you create the experience that you want in a game. So that's kind of the framing device for that.
The blocks, the tools that you outline there, how do they change when you go from digital game space to tabletop to live action? Like, I'm sure they're still the same in concept, but there must be differences.
Yeah. So a lot of the differences have to do with, so I play a lot of tabletop role-playing games where, and I've never really enjoyed computer role-playing games, even though I made one early in my career, Return to Krondor. I was trying to fix the problems that I saw in tabletop or in computer role-playing games in making that one. And I was very, very new, and I don't think I succeeded very well. But one of the problems is that computers don't do a very good job of remembering you. They don't do a very good job of sort of recognizing when you've done something interesting and feeding that back to you later in ways that make you feel more successful. And tabletop experiences can do that very, very well, because a GM is just another human being sitting across from you, and they can remember the cool things that you did and make use of that later. They remember the horrible thing that you did and make use of that later. You go into a town and you here's an example. My short Warcraft experience, World of Warcraft experience, is leaving the elf village and going out, and the next little village you find is a little village of bear people, and you can kill them all. And why would I want to do that? First off, it seems weird. Okay. But second off, that should have repercussions for me down the line. Like this neighboring village killed off by this guy,
Right?
but it never does, right? But in a tabletop experience, you can have that experience, and that can be a major plot point. Like the GM didn't expect you to go and kill all these bear people, and really just wanted you to talk to one of them and get the quest or whatever. But that's not what you did. You did something else instead, and the GM has to sort of live with that, and then he can bring that back. Or they can bring that back and either have repercussions for it, or have something cool happen because of it, or whatever that happens to be. And that feels really great. If people also like to be seen.
Yes.
And so computer games are not very good about seeing players. We're getting a little bit better at it. Modern role-playing games versus the one that I made 25 years ago do a little bit better job of remembering some of this stuff, but they just can't remember everything, and they can't remember the spontaneous stuff. They can only remember the things that the game designers ask them to remember.
That's what makes a really magical tabletop experience, though, is a DM who or GM who's paying attention and sees those hooks or sees what a player is passionate about and starts to weave a completely new story or pull the story in a direction to appeal to that player's fantasy, to give that
That's
player
right.
the experience that they want.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And sometimes, sometimes games scratch the itch for you very, very well, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you get very excited about a game, hoping that you don't even realize or can't really explicitly name the itch that you want to scratch, but you know when it's scratched
Yeah.
and you know when it's kind of not scratched. And yeah.
Well, as a designer and obviously a DM GM yourself, how do you balance, appeasing the players and giving them agency and appealing to their story, but at the same time, as a designer, a writer, and a somebody running a game, you want to tell a story that has emotional resonance. So you have
Yeah.
to sometimes take control and sometimes push them or weave a story in a direction a certain way. Where do you find the balance? Where does Andy find that spot?
Right. That's a very good question, and it's a real challenge. I ran a D&D game for almost 18 years. And I ran it in such an open sandboxy way. I just let the players go wherever they wanted and do whatever they wanted. And I sort of crafted story around whatever they were doing. But then I realized that we were getting close to the end of it, and I wanted to wrap the game up, and I wanted to wrap the game up in some big way, and I
Mhm.
didn't know how. Like, I hadn't been following any sort of larger story structure. In a sandbox game, you can kind of do whatever you want. And
Right.
I had these sort of minor stories. They would like cause some sort of problem would develop, and they would go and solve it. I mean, that's the simplest story structure that I can use, and I use it all the time, which is, you know, develop a problem and then complicate the problem, and then the players solve the complication, and then they solve the problem, and then they get a big reward. So that's the story. That's
Yeah.
a 3-act story is just, hey, what's the problem? Hey, what's the solution? All right, apply the solution to the problem. If you're successful, yay, it's a comedy. If you're not successful, too bad, it's a tragedy. and
Yeah.
uh, and but I didn't like they had sort of solved all these little problems on the way, and I hadn't developed any sort of major problem. The nice thing about that 3-act structure too is that it's sort of fractal.
Hmm.
You can you can take a little 3-act structure and insert it into the first act of a bigger story, and
Yeah.
that first act can be the bigger that can end up being the first act of an even bigger story, and so on. You can it's there's probably a theoretical limit to how many times you can do that to the players or to your audience, whether they're readers or TV viewers or movie watchers. Like, I don't know how many um, trilogies you can insert at the beginning of Star Wars before it starts to feel like, wait a minute, it's just trilogies all the way down.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's got to be a limit.
but I think that you can sort of do that a little ways, right? Uh,
Yeah. I think,
So yeah,
oh,
I think I answered your question there somewhere in the
yes,
middle of that. I think I answered your question.
you definitely did. And I think we also need to remember sometimes it's more about the game than it is about the story. Sometimes it's just about sitting down and having fun. The story is
Right,
not that vital sometimes. We can just play a game. That
right,
works
right.
too.
Yeah, and it depends. Again, your expectations. Are you expecting a game with story, or are you not
Right.
expecting a game with story?
Right.
Uh, I had a friend of mine running a D&D game that he expressly told us this is not a game with story.
Hmm.
This is just we're just gonna fight monsters. Every week we're just gonna get together and we're gonna fight some monsters.
Monster of the week.
Monster of the week. But he couldn't actually, when it came down to it, there was a boss. And so there was story.
Hmm.
And he couldn't actually bring himself to not create the story. So
Even when you sit down, you play miniature war games, or you sit down and play a board game that's designed to be the gameplay without the narrative, You still end up making a narrative out of it. Like there's
Yeah,
still in your head even.
absolutely. Absolutely. I designed a game that expressly used that. There's a little board game or a little card game called tabletop game called the Sibling Struggle. It's meant to be like a very light role-playing game. You play kids on adventures out of your backyard. And all it is just reveal a card and tell a story about what happened. And it's great. You know who loves that game? 6-year-olds.
Oh yeah.
Because they haven't yet gotten the fear of like taking things in a wrong direction or like worry about like,
I love
and
that.
they're just great. They're just great. They just go with it. Whatever's happening, they're just on board.
I love when my kids were little, when I had a problem with a story or a game I was working on, I would just go ask them. Like seriously,
Yeah.
I would.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Stuff
Yeah.
they would come up with.
Endlessly inventive.
Yeah. Clever. Okay, well, let's take it one step further. Live
Okay.
action role playing games, LARPs.
Yeah.
How does this apply to that? How do you integrate story structures in such a way that it works with the gameplay, where it's so much about the story and about the acting and so much less about
Yeah.
the actual mechanics?
Right. So the LARPs that we ran are a very specific style of LARP. So these are the kind of LARPs that I cut my teeth on. They were one-shot LARPs. We would create, usually from some other fiction. We would create a scenario. Yeah, it's House Atreides on Dune at the end of the war.
That's cool.
And so we'd create this sort of setting and we'd say, okay, now who wants to be who? And some people might want to play characters from the books. Some people might create brand new characters that would fit into that milieu. That could potentially be at that place. So it might be like, and so we'd ask our players, potential players, to write characters for us. And they would write a one-page sort of character idea of like who they are and what they're doing there and what they're trying to do. We would take all of those things and then we would rewrite them all and tie them together, try to keep the thing that they were clearly excited about, but maybe it needed to be tweaked a little bit so it tied better with this other character and what they're trying to do. And so we would end up having this sort of intermeshed set of characters. And then at time of game, this game would run maybe 4 to 6 hours at somebody's house, and people would come in costume and do and then we would start the game. And then as GMs, we were sort of hands off. The game would sort of run itself. We tried to create mechanics that we didn't need to be involved in, because anytime that the game masters needed to be involved with something, the narrative part of the game would grind to a halt.
Right.
Like, go find a GM, and then wait for us to show up, resolve something, and then go on. So we tried to create mechanics that were very much GM free. The players could just manage it themselves. And then the game would just sort of flow to whatever end the game would flow to. And we, as game masters, we would never know what was going to happen. And so to that end, what we were trying to do story-wise was create a space that story could happen in, but that we didn't try to pre-plan. Our early examples of trying to pre-plan stories would just end disastrously, because the players would always do something. They never knew what we wanted them to do. There was no way, if we led them too much, there would be resistance to us leading them. And they would try to do something different anyway. And so I learned early on just like to try to be really hands-off about where story was going to go. And sometimes that would lead to situations where, players' stories would end really quickly, but there was still a lot of game left. So we also spent a lot of time thinking about each individual player's story. Like, we want to make sure that they had the opportunity to fulfill their story in some way. And how would that happen? who would they need to contact, and how would they know to contact that person, or like, and so there were a lot of those sort of decisions we were making as we were rewriting their characters, just to make sure that these connections would get made in interesting ways, just so that each player felt like they had their story. And as this sort
Smart.
of process of games evolved, we realized that some people wanted to be the stars of the whole show. And some people were happy to play supporting characters. And some people were happy to play characters who were just watching from the edges. And so then we realized, oh, there's actually another sort of axis of, like, when we send out that initial questionnaire, who are you and what are you doing, and we also need to ask them from a player's point of view, how involved do you want to be? And so we ended up, but like, they were very, very there were a lot of work, for one night.
Yeah.
And so they're not really, they weren't something that anybody could ever do as anything but just a hobby.
Mm.
Right. There's no way to turn that into anything. But what's interesting is when I saw Star Wars, the hotel, that was open for like 2.5 years
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
they did it. They managed it. And the way that they did it was they had this sort of reverse tree. And it was, I saw the GDC talk about this, and I was just blown away by what they had figured out how to do. So instead of like in a traditional sort of branching structure, stare and narrative, you might, like a choose your own adventure kind of thing, whatever. You would start someplace, and then there would be a choice, and it would branch, and then you would have another choice, and it would branch again and branch again. The branches would go out sort of that way. They did the opposite. They had all of these different branches at the beginning, so it was more like roots. So the roots of the tree would pick up players depending on how the players wanted to be picked up. So they had roots that were designed to sort of catch the players who wanted to be super active. But then they had other roots that would catch players who didn't want to be, who were just going to be watchers, or they were just the parents of the kids who were super active. Or so there would be all these different routes that would then lead them to other story nodes that would lead them in and finally lead them to the central root of the story. And that would be the climactic moment of the game. And it was unbelievably, I mean, like, I was just so impressed by how they had managed to like think about how all of these different players and different player types, and they would have no idea who was coming. Every 4 days, or every week, it was a different group of people, have no idea what they wanted or who they were or anything. And yet this game would sort of catch them in the way that they wanted to be caught.
It's brilliant. It sounds like something you should almost apply at tabletop role-playing games, is like your session 0 before you get going, is to stop and ask people, so do you want to be a star? Do you want to just be a sidekick? Do you want to be supporting? Like, what is your narrative goals for this game?
Yeah, for sure. And your session 0s when you're doing tabletop RPGs are super important to like make sure that you are aware of what your players want. Make sure that there isn't any players who are really outliers. Like, oh, this is everybody 5 players want this thing, but that 6th player wants something totally different. You're like,
Yeah.
this may not be the game for you. No personal feelings about that at all. It's just what you want is different from what everybody else wants.
And you'd rather find out then than, 6 months into a campaign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially if they get angrier and angrier, not getting what they're looking for, hoping to get, like, showing up every weekend and spending 6 hours hoping to get something that they're not going to get is brutal.
Yeah.
That's, nobody wants that.
Indeed. And then they start poisoning the well and the game starts taking a turn, and we've all seen it.
Right.
And
right.
those of us
It's
that have
very
played for
easy to
many
start
long.
to troll. When you're sitting there getting angrier and angrier, it's very easy to start trolling.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So aside from that, are there things you've learned from live action and tabletop that are applicable across, like, one to the other, across the board? Are there learnings that are learned in one?
I think that, understanding your players, like the LARP stuff really made us super aware. Like, And in that situation, it was a very, very specifically and personal, like one-to-one awareness of like, oh, Kathy wants to be this kind of player doing this kind of thing. Let's make sure that we write a character that does that for Kathy. But when you're thinking about like a larger game, like I would like to, at some point in my career, make some online LARPs, like things that run like the LARPs that we did, but are played online with strangers. And the way that I think that you would want to do that is just to make sure that you understood again, and did things like the Imagineers did for the Disney experience, like make sure that you have a way to capture what it is that they want, so long as within the realm of what you're offering. So that's the other aspect of all this too, is that you need to be, as game designers, we need to be aware of the entire arc. So there's stepping back a little bit. Imagine an arc, start to finish. The player first hears about the game, and then there's a whole arc that goes from they purchase the game, they open the box, do whatever it is, they prepare to play the game, they play the game, they talk about it with their friends, they get excited about the game, they play the game. There's a little moment in the middle where they're playing the game, and then they're talking about the game, and maybe they play the game again, and they talk about the game some more, and and ultimately at some point they stop playing the game, or they stop talking about the game that they played before. And that entire arc is the domain of the game designer. Like, as a game designer, you should be aware of how they find out about your game, how they, like, how do they interact with the game on the way to playing the game? Like, how is that? And some people do this really, really well. And part of the writing, and part of the really important part of writing, to bring it back to story and video games, the intersection of writing in this is to make sure as they're climbing that arc towards playing the game, they know what the game is. They know what to expect from the game. They know what the game is going to ask them to do. They know what the game is going to be. They know whether or not they're going to enjoy the game. You kind of want to slough off the people who are not going to enjoy your game. Right. Naturally, we want to make games for everybody. We always do. We are like, who's your target for your game? Well, it's everybody. No, it isn't.
No.
It never is. Be more specific, please. You want to make sure that the people who want to play your game get to your game, and the people who really don't want to play your game never touch it, because they can bring the whole thing down if they get to your game. If they are not turned off by all the stuff that they hear about your game, by the time they get to your game, they're going to be turned off by your game. And like you mentioned before, they've come a long ways. They're going to be angry.
Yeah. That actually kind of opens a side tangent for a moment here, seeing as we both have graphic design backgrounds.
Oh yeah.
You're dealing with tabletop. Things like topography, graphic design, page layout, cover design, art, the art choices that are made, your art director, all of that also influences that, does it not? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all part of it. Your narrative elements start with the artwork that they see. The exploration of what this game is and what this world is going to be and what they're expected to do starts with that artwork. And which means that you not only have to be really super aware of what the artwork is saying within the culture that you are presenting it. And I'm finding as I'm getting older, that's actually getting a little bit harder for me to do, because the culture is, I don't know these younger people like I know the people my age. I don't know all the memes. I don't know what my artwork is necessarily saying to them. I pick a piece of artwork and I'm like, that's super cool. That tells me all kinds of stuff about this game. but is it saying the same thing to me as it's saying to something who's 19?
Right.
And that's, and so I have to make myself, um, I have to make myself more aware of the culturally relevant stuff that
Hmm.
is stuff that's not necessarily made for me. I mean, you and I have been in the catbird seat of everything since we've been 12 has been made exactly for us.
Yeah. As tabletop gamers, yeah, very much so. I
Mhm.
agree completely, and I'm glad to see it changing. But yeah, you are 100% right.
Right. And honestly, culturally, like so much of television is made specifically for us.
Hmm.
Um, Big budget things, particularly. And we're going to start to see that change.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, and I know it's going to be shocking. I'm trying to prepare myself for being shocked
Mm.
by like, why are they making a big budget, for example? Why are they making, I just saw a trailer last night. Why are they making a big budget 3D animated Smurfs?
That's, I, I'm the weirdo who loves that stuff. So like I'm straight white guy who's I love what we get. I love the Marvel movies. I mean I read Infinity Gauntlet when it first came out back in the
Yep.
day, but I love seeing new stories, new ways of telling
Yeah.
stories, like things that I would have never thought of. I love absorbing that stuff. So for
Yeah.
me it's a candy store. It's fantastic, but I
Yeah.
understand.
Actually, on that, a lot of our students where I teach are um, overseas are from there's a word I'm looking for, international. That's the word I'm
There
looking
you
for. They're
go.
international students. Um, and I can't wait to see what they go when they go back to their home culture. And
Mm,
we're starting to see it now. We're beginning to see games made in China and in India and
hmm.
in Africa for people who are not Westerners. They're starting to make games for themselves, and it's fascinating. And I
Yeah.
can't wait. Um, we animate. This happened with animation 40 years ago, and it gave us this whole genre of animation that is now a giant thing in the West. It's not made for Westerners.
No.
It was animation made for Japanese animators making Japanese animation for Japanese people
Hmm.
and telling stories in ways that we were not expecting, that we couldn't even translate properly when they first came over.
But
And yeah,
it's amazing
amazing.
though. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I love it. I love it. I think more, please. Like, what
Yes,
else can they do? What else have I not seen yet? I want it all now.
that's right.
I think I've heard every variation on Celtic folklore and Norse folklore
Yes.
and
Uh,
mythology and Greek and Roman. I want something
right.
different.
We've seen all the King Arthur stuff done
Mm,
every way possible. China's about done, I think. They're about. I'm hoping that they're about seeing the Journey to the West, the Monkey King story told as many times as they want to have seen it told, and they will then start to like really open
yeah.
up.
Some of the other interesting, like I have a friend who's a Filipino filmmaker, and some of the horror stuff that he's told that I was like the tick tick and stuff, like look it up. It's incredible. Some of the stories they
Oh
have are
yeah.
amazing and creepy as hell.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So good.
Um, yeah, so good. And we'll start to see that stuff and it'll be great.
Cool. All right, well let's start to bring the core topic to a close here. I guess I like to look for a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of value we can share with the other designers, the young designers coming in.
Sure.
What is something that you see that they should be aware of, something that's coming down the pipe, or a tool or a technique that you can share with them relevant to this whole idea of the interaction of narrative and game design in this structure?
Yeah, we started to talk a little bit about um well we sort of touched on computer role-playing games and what they were really bad at 25 years ago and
Hmm.
how they're a little bit better now and how they can be much better in the future. Um, and that is with AI
Mm.
that actually pays attention to the actual things that you've done in the game. I can imagine, and I don't think it would be very difficult to do, knowing what little I know. So grain of salt, please, about AI, is you could potentially have an AI watching everything that you do in a computer role-playing game and remembering and able to go back and look through that and bring stuff back up.
Mm.
Somebody could have heard about your exploits when you go into a tavern. All of that stuff will help you. So I think that there's a real opportunity for computer role-playing games to make use of AI in that way, to flesh out the people that you meet up with, and to make them all aware of the changes that are happening in the world, largely because you, the player, are running around making changes in the world.
Right. That's
And
exciting.
therefore, like, and therefore seeing you in a way that we've probably never been seen by a computer role-playing game. I think there's a real opportunity there. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about so much other stuff. I'm really looking forward to, like you're saying, like what comes out of, other cultures, or
Mhm.
the culture that replaces our culture just because, we're of age.
Yeah. Or
Uh,
the brand new stuff that comes out of the final amalgamation of cultures, something completely new could be given birth to.
yeah, absolutely. And new cultures spinning off, new subcultures spinning off and creating their own stuff too.
Yeah.
And all this stuff it's becoming so much easier to make anything now. You know, um, you could in the early days of video games, a few people could sit down and create a video game, but it was very limited video game.
Hmm.
Um, but you really had to have some specialized knowledge. But it wasn't hard to get that specialized knowledge. But then that specialized knowledge became much harder to work with. But then they've created tools. So now we can go back, and it's become much more democratized,
Yeah.
to use a big word. Uh, it's easier for anybody to like get some people together and watch some YouTube videos and learn how to make a game.
Yeah.
And you can do it. And if you're smart, you don't start with something huge. Start with something small, make your first small game, and then move on to a bigger game after that, once you sort of know what you're doing and how you're doing it. Same deal with tabletop games. It's becoming really, really easy to and we've seen an explosion of tabletop games. I'm not talking about role-playing games specifically, I'm board and card games, but
Yeah. Yeah.
we've been in a sort of a golden age of creativity in that space, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see games made for other cultures sort of slide into our hobby, and it's great.
Hmm. Yeah. I agree. Fantastic. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of the core subject. I do have a fun question I like to ask everybody who comes on the show. I'm sure you've heard it once or twice, but I'm going to throw it at you too because I want to hear your answer. So,
Sure.
in my opinion, there's a magical space at the intersection of the story and game, improv, comic books, movies, all these things where we can all get together, instant fellowship, shared language. If you agree with my little theory here, and not everybody does, but if you do,
But I do.
okay, perfect. What's the magic thread that holds that space together?
Oh, that's an excellent question. The magic, so we see it in a micro level when we play a tabletop role-playing game. Because what are we doing? We're sitting around, we've got papers in front of us and dice, but we're all living in a world that we imagine well enough to where we are able to talk about that world and do things in that world, and nothing's confused. Like there might be a moment of like, oh, hey, I didn't realize you were right next to me when I did that thing. Oh, right. So,
Yeah.
those little things come up, but most of the time we pretty much imagine everything close enough to where we can talk about it and do things in that world without getting in each other's way and without causing any sort of conflicts in our understanding of the world. And I think that's the thread that holds the larger space together. So I can take that sort of macro idea or micro idea and turn it into a macro idea. What is this? Yeah. So if we're all gathering together and we can imagine a world where we can all play games together, like that's the thread, that's the magic thread that holds it all together. The ability to imagine a world where we're all working together and doing the things that we like to do and doing the things we can do. I mean, we might be competing and we might be cooperating, we might be doing all, like all the ways that we interact with each other. But we're ultimately all working together to play a game.
I like that. That sounds like a world I would enjoy being in. That sounds like a nice world.
I try to be there all the time.
I'm jealous. Okay, well, that's my fun question. I guess we're almost done here. Before I head out, I'd like to open up a little space. If there's anything you want to signal boost, is there anything you got going on, something you've made?
Actually, yeah, I don't mind. So I am a co-host of another podcast that I would love to send your listeners to if they're not already there, which is an ethics in video games podcast. So myself, I'm the video game designer, and then the ethicist is a philosopher who I work with, who teaches the philosophy classes at the same college.
Nice.
We got together and have we have like 70 some odd episodes in the can. We're not making them anymore. They're all done. We might make some more in the future, but we're sort of we did it during the lockdown.
Gotcha.
And we cover a lot of really interesting topics and have a lot of really interesting people on as guests on our show.
Cool.
Talking about all kinds of, we had no idea it would go on for 70 some odd episodes. We thought we'd get like 12 or 15 out of it and then be like, well, what else are we going to talk about? But it turns out there was a lot.
Very cool.
Yeah, I run a freelance video game design or tabletop game design or just game design company called Giant Stance Games. I've had a lot of really interesting clients, including a client that makes serious games. The last game I was working on was really interesting. And it's a game that trains people who are working with people with dementia. So caregivers who are working with dementia patients need training. Turns out you get a lot of training. They're frequently people that are, frequently don't have a lot of education. Frequently don't speak English as a first language, and so we made kind of I don't know about fun, but interactive way of giving them some real basic education about how to treat people with dementia. Turns out there's lots of different kinds of dementia. I didn't know.
I wouldn't have known that either.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, well, I will throw the links in the show notes so people can check that out as well, and check out the podcast. I will throw that in there as well. That's it, my friend.
Great.
I'm going to push you out into the cold.
Thank you.
Kick you out of my tavern here. Well, thank you, my friend. This was a really, really fun. Let's do it again.
All right. Love it. Bye now.
Later. And that's a wrap on another episode of The Corner of Story and Game. Thank you again for Andy for sitting down and sharing your insights and wisdoms into the intricate world of game design across multiple formats. And to you, dear listener, as always, thank you for taking your seat at the table. Until we meet again, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at The Corner of Story and Game.